Who is that?
That is the Rosh Yeshiva of the Lubavitcher Yeshiva in Montreal, a former Rosh Yeshiva, Rabbi Aizik Schwei.
Aizik Schwei, the most I ever heard about him from you was that you named my brother after him. My brother, Nissen Aizik, is named Aizik after Aizik Schwei. So apparently he meant a lot to you. But he was a Rosh Yeshiva. He wasn't a mashpia. He wasn't a spiritual mentor. He was a Rosh Yeshiva. He taught the Gemara. He taught Talmud. So what was it about Aizik Schwei that was so special that you decided to name one of your kids after him?
Well, first of all, he also came from Russia. But his experience was as a child. He was 10 years old when his father passed away, and his mother, desperate to have him educated in Torah, sent him off to Samarkand as a 10-year-old, not knowing whether she'll ever see him again. Anyway, he came there and went right into the studies. And that also, we need a background to know what it means to go to a cheder under the communists. The danger of it. How did she do this? She met a chassid who happened to be a Mishulovim. And they recognized each other as chassidim. They didn't know each other personally. She had 3 sons, and she was desperate to get them into a yeshiva, underground yeshiva. She begged and pleaded and threatened, and finally got this stranger to agree to take her sons to where the yeshiva was hiding. In order to make it a little less dangerous, the child was told, if anyone asks on the train where you're going and who you're going with, you should not mention the guy you're with. Like, you're not related at all, you don't know the guy, you're just running away from home because you're unhappy at home, and you don't know where you're going, wherever the train will take you. 10 years old, and you have to fight the system. His older brother, Baruch Sholem, had already been taken to the yeshiva by this guy, and now the mother wanted him to take another risk and bring her 10-year-old to the yeshiva. And they did the same thing. So that Aizik arrives there, and he goes into the study and so on. And then his younger brother, who passed away just recently, who was the Rav in Crown Heights, he was 8 years old, and the mother sent him too. 8 years old, away from home, not knowing if he'll ever see her again. But she promised that she would come visit him in order to get him to agree to go. When he arrived there, he found that the boys, the students, each had a bench that they slept on. That was their bed.
They're sweet.
When he got there were no benches. But his brother Aizik gave him his bench. Then, where did these boys eat? People were dying in the streets from hunger.
This was during the war? Approximately? Right.
I'm not sure.
Yeah.
I'm not sure they were dying because of the war or just because of communism. There was no food to be had. So there were a few wealthy families, Hasidic families, who offered to feed students every day. A little bit that they had. But those were only for kids who came from comfortable homes who wouldn't be able to survive the deprivations. The other kids were given a day of the week to eat with this family. The next day they would eat with another family because the family couldn't give them a week's worth. So they broke it up each day in a different. When his brother arrived, his 8-year-old brother, Rabbi Aizik, it was called teg. You eat teg. Which days do you eat where? Rabbi Aizik gave up his place in the rotation for his younger brother. All three of them grew up to be brilliant, refined, incredible human beings. Anyone who met Rabbi Aizik in Montreal somehow spontaneously came up with the same description: a prince of a man. Brilliant in every way, refined and gentle and thoughtful, and every quality you want to see in a person, he embodied. His mother survived, and they all came to the States. When his mother went to see the Rebbe privately in the Rebbe's office, when she walked in, the Rebbe stood up. And she was horrified.
The Rebbe should stand for her.
Yes. Chassidim don't like that kind of formality. And so she said, please, for me, you stand up. The Rebbe said, for your sons. For a woman who can raise by herself 3 such sons. I remember his older brother. He was very tall and very quiet. And he worked as a typesetter in Schusterman's publishing house. Any sefer, any book that he typeset, he knew by heart. He remembered it all. Hardly ever spoke. Very, very quiet, very private. He passed away a young man. Rabbi Aizik, on the other hand, was a personality. He was a very respected figure in the community in Montreal, beyond the Chabad community. Anyone who needed advice on almost any subject in the world would come to his house. And his clarity of thought, like people would say, he was a genius in simplicity. So when he explained something, it was so clear, it was so obvious, you had to wonder, like, why didn't I think of that? So he taught me the halachic process. How do you go from a Gemara where there is discussion, theory, debate, different opinions? How do you get to the conclusion? And he did this in one session. I know he did this for many students. He knew exactly what they needed, what step was missing in their studies. And he would come in unannounced, sit down, and fix the problem in your head. And when he did that for me, he was like, I owe him.
How old were you when you were in Montreal approximately? How were you? Were there 1 year or 2 years or 3 years or what?
2 years. 2 years. I was 17 and 18.
And so while he was the Rosh Yeshiva, who was the Mashpia? Who was the spiritual leader of the yeshiva?
The community had a mashpia and the yeshiva had a mashpia. So the mashpia in the yeshiva was Rabbi Greenglass, Wolf Greenglass, And for the community, there was Peretz Mochkin. Peretz Mochkin was in Tashkent during the war years, and that's where my father and my grandfather first met up with Chabad. There was a yeshiva there, as well as Samarkand, and my uncle, who was younger than my father, actually got to study in that yeshiva. And my father was busy supporting the family and taking care of his father, so he didn't get to study much. But the greatness of Peretz Mochkin made a very big impression on my grandfather. And so when we came to America, we naturally gravitated towards the Chabad community in Brooklyn.
But Peretz Mochkin was the mashpia in the city, and Rabbi Greenglass was the mashpia in the yeshiva. And you didn't name any kids Peretz or Wolf. Well, Wolf was still alive. He passed away so long ago.
Right.
He lived a very, very long life. But you did name a kid after the Rosh Hashiva. So did he farbring with the Bachrim? Usually Rosh Hashiva doesn't farbring with the boys.
No, first of all, I ate in his house every Friday night for 2 years, which was such a privilege. I don't even know how I lucked out on that one. And we would go to New York for farbringings like Yutes Kislev and Yud Shvat. So we would take a bus, and we would sit together on the bus for 8 hours. So there was a much more of a personal relationship. With Peretz, I really didn't have. He wasn't necessarily focused on the students, but he was an incredible figure. Just looking at him was awesome. Looked like a lion. You don't have a picture of him?
I can get a picture of him. Or I can just get a picture of a lion. So you could sit on a bus for 8 hours with Aizik Schwei. And what do you bring about? It's funny. I'll tell you. I'll be honest. You're not known as a Bal Nigla. You're not known as a master of the Talmud. That's not your specialty. So therefore, it's very, very interesting that you had a closer connection with the Rosh Hashiva and then with the Mashpia. It's just very interesting. So what it tells me anyway is that either you're hiding some skills and love for Gemara that we don't know about, or that he was a Mashpia in a Rosh Hashiva's clothing.
Every chassid is. But the conversations were like almost any topic in the world. I remember very clearly as we were sitting there and the other students were kind of filing up and down the bus, and he would make a comment about each one. About, this one's greatness and this one's virtue and this one's specialty and so on. And then one student walked by and he said, "This one, just for him, I would start the whole yeshiva." So even the younger generation had its special heroes and giants.
I would guess who it was, but I'm not going to do it live. It was maybe somebody that I wanted to ask you about.
He actually lives in California.
He lives in California.
The Shliach, yes.
Oh, listen to the rescue. There you go.
Mm-hmm. Not the greatest picture, but yes.
This is Peretz Mochkin. Yeah, the picture is not so good. Thank you.
He rescued my parents actually in a financial, physical sense. When they came to Tashkent, you couldn't work at any regular job because then you would have to show up on Shabbos. So the alternative was to buy a knitting machine and knit some clothes and sell it. So when my grandfather arrived, he Peretz found some money someplace, borrowed money to buy a knitting machine for my grandfather to knit socks, because my grandfather didn't know how to run a machine.
This is in Kazakhstan.
So my father had Uzbekistan. And my father had to run the machine and support the family. But I mean, this kind of kindness, a total stranger shows up, you go out and you borrow money to buy him a machine so that he won't starve or have to go work on Shabbos. So it was not just the heroics of courage, of not being intimidated by threats and so on. It was also giants in kindness, in mutual concern for each other. It was a beautiful. Many of the people in Montreal were, like I just mentioned to somebody, if I had to put together an A team,
All-star team,
an all-star team, that's what we had there. Everyone there was something special.
Okay. All right. Here's another picture of Rabbi.
By the way, Aizik, before we leave, Rabbi Aizik passed away from cancer of the throat. Last time I spoke to him, he could hardly speak. He whispered. And I asked him, what's the matter? He says, laryngitis.
Well, he was hiding it?
Yep. His wife told me that he would sit and study. He was passing away. This cancer was killing him. And it must have been very, very painful. But he would never complain. But she would listen while he sat and studied out loud. And when his breath caught for a second, she knew that the pain had become unbearable for that second or moment. But he never, and he refused to take chemo because it would cause his hair to fall out and he would be without a beard.
For that reason, he refused to take chemo?
Yeah. Also because he saw others who went through chemo and he was not impressed.
All right. And that is Rabbi Aizik Schwei.